Speaker, Dorothy Michelson Livingston. She grew up in Chicago, now lives in New York. She has served as honorary vice chairman of the Michelson-Morley Centennial Celebration. She is speaking on a subject on which she is quite expert, namely her father. She has written a biography of Albert Michelson called Master of Light. What a particularly appropriate title, Master of Light. Dorothy Michelson Livingston.
Good morning. I'm very happy and not a little, forgive me, proud to be here this morning and to tell you about memories of my childhood and my father. I think one of the first things I remember was his returning from South America. I believe he was in Peru for a lecture, and he brought back a great big shining solid gold medal. I wrote in my diary, if it were only mine, I'd sell it and buy a horse. He also brought back some hummingbird wings, the feathers of hummingbirds, and large beetles with iridescent wings. And he explained to us that this was not pigment, it was just the reflection of light on myriads of tiny grooves. And he said, you know, I'm trying to make a grating that would have as many grooves, but it takes me years and years to make one little grating, and these beetles and hummingbirds just do it automatically. He was a very nice teacher with us children, and he took the pains to give me and my sister violin lessons every morning before he went to the laboratory. This never stuck very hard with me because I didn't turn into a violinist, but I did learn to love music, and that has given me a great deal of pleasure all my life. And it was particularly true last night and the night before when we heard these wonderful compositions. He was very good at teaching us. He taught, for instance, we had a place in the country up in Canada, and we lived on an island, and everything came and went in little boats, and we had sailboats. And I can remember my father standing on the end of the dock with a megaphone and calling to us, now ready about if you're tacking, and when you're coming down before the wind, now you've got a jibe. And above all, you must bring the boat up gently and make a smooth landing when you come in. Don't crash the dock. He played tennis. He was a good tennis player, and I think he had a certain stroke which was called a Lawford. I believe it was some kind of a slice that made the ball very difficult to receive. He was a good chess player. Winter evenings taught me to play chess, and I had a lot of tennis lessons, which has given me pleasure all my life. He played three-cushion billiards, and I think he was very good at that because he could predict the angles. Having been working with angles of light, he was very good at three-cushion billiards. On Saturday morning, sometimes he would take me to the laboratory, and I remember the visits there, he had a scales that was very, very sensitive. And I'd pull out one hair of my head to measure the weight of it, and put it on the scales, and it just staggered like that with the weight of one hair. There was the ruling engine, which we couldn't disturb. We could look at it through a window or the door, or the glass door, and it was there steadily ruling these beautiful slides that he made. He told me stories of his life at Annapolis, at the Naval Academy, and he was lightweight boxing champion there. And he told me that he went to class one day and he had not done his math problem. And he was the first person to be sent to the board. And he got up there and he looked at the problem, which he hadn't done, and he figured out a way to solve it. It was different from what was in the book, but he got the right answer. And the instructor said, you've been cheating. You've got some sort of pony or trot, and you will be up for court-martial. Well, when the day came around that he had to go before the board, they said, what explanation have you? He said, well, if you give me another problem. And so they did, and he solved the problem in front of them with his new original method and coming out with the right answer. After graduation, he went to sea for 2 years, and then he came back and became an instructor in physics. And the first problem was to illustrate for the students the measurement of the speed of light. Foucault's measurement of the speed of light. And instead of just doing this on the blackboard, he decided to build a live experiment, and he bought a little rotating mirror, a mirror that he used with his own money, and it was done there, and they've got a big white line at Annapolis over the line where he measured the speed of light. And his answer that he got was far more accurate than anything that had been achieved so far. With this success, he began thinking about other things he might like to do, and he read a letter from James Clerk Maxwell that came to the Nautical Almanac, and it described an idea that it might be possible to measure the speed of the Earth through the ether by a method of finding out the speed of light going with the Earth's motion and across the Earth's motion. But Maxwell said, this is much too small an area to be measured. It would be impossible. Michelson thought differently, and with some encouragement, he decided to go to Berlin for future study, studied with the great Hermann von Helmholtz, and after a year, this is 1880, he received a grant from Alexander Graham Bell, who gave him the money to have the mirrors polished and built for him. And he set up the first experiment in the basement of the University of Berlin. But there were traffic vibrations. Even in those days, the horses and carriages were pounding over his head, and it shook the thing. So he moved to the basement of the Solar Observatory in Potsdam. And this was in 1881. He there made the first, set up all his instruments and worked for several months until he got what we all know was the negative answer. I went to Berlin for the 100th celebration of this experiment, and my young friend Hans Haubold invited me to come there, and it was a very interesting discussion then of the significance of this experiment in the light of modern science. He was disappointed, as I guess you all know, that he didn't get the accurate measurement that he wanted because the negative outcome. So he returned to America and resigned from the Navy and was welcomed at Cleveland here as the first professor of physics at the Case School of Applied Science, it was called. And there, the happy coincidence of his meeting with Edward Morley, which was really one of the most wonderful things of his time here, was a friendship with this great chemist. And Morley encouraged him to build the interferometer again and was exceedingly helpful. I think it was Morley who had the idea of mounting the whole thing in quicksilver, so it moved around without any difficulty, as smooth as it could be. Einstein was, I think, about 40 years younger than my father. And in 1905, when he made his great thesis, he was disappointed that he didn't get instant recognition from 4 people: Ernst Mach, H.A. Lorentz, Poincaré, and Michelson. And none of the 4 of them came forward in 1905 and said, "This is it." Well, later years, he came to America when he was widely recognized and feted from one end of the country to the other. He showed a certain coldness at meetings. My father and he would meet at various scientific gatherings, and he was, chilly. And of course, Michelson never liked his theory, so that was another point. And so they really never spoke then. But then my father retired from Chicago to California, and he was working up on Mount Wilson when Einstein appeared out there. And in the evening of his life, he was very happy to talk with Einstein. He was also, my father was failing in health, and he was really quite ill at the end. And Einstein used to come to the house, and I was there when he came. And my father would play him a tune on the violin, and he would play the violin, and then Father would get out some watercolors that he'd been making of California. And the whole friendship was really sealed in a beautiful way. Well, I think I've spoken enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, Michelson, Livingston, for those remarks. We now have a coffee break, and I will ask you to please reassemble here a bit before 10 past 11 so that we can be all seated at 11:10. Thank you very much.